Somewhere in Japan right now, a man who constantly coughs up blood is smiling, walking into a school full of teenagers, and he has been hired to train them. Not to heal them, not to protect them, to train them. If your first reaction is, "Sir, please see a doctor, congratulations," you understand precisely 0% of what Tougen Anki is about. And that's exactly why you need to be here for this. Because this anime looked at the cute, wholesome, let's be friends energy of most school-set shonen and said, nah, let's make the substitute teacher a walking health hazard with a smile on his face and a war behind his eyes. Welcome back to Anime's Update. Today we're cracking into the brand new art and cast reveal for Tougen Anki's upcoming arc Nikko Kegon Falls and folks. This is the arc longtime manga readers have been not so quietly losing their minds over for years. Let's get into it. First, some ground rules, because if you skip Season 1, we need to get you caught up before we go anywhere near a waterfall. Tougen Anki is, on paper, a retelling of Momotaro Yes, the folk tale about the peach boy who teams up with a dog, a monkey, and a pheasant to go beat up demons on Demon Island. Adorable bedtime story, right? Wrong. This anime grabs that cute little fairy tale, throws it into a blender with centuries of blood feud, and pours out something that's less storybook and more generational trauma with superpowers. In this world, the bloodline of the Oni the demons and the bloodline of Momotaro's descendants have been at war for literal ages. And our lead, Shiki Ichinos, thought he was just a normal kid, living a normal life, until the Momotaro agency showed up and revealed surprise he's actually got Oni blood running through his veins. So now he's the guy everyone in his own supposed side of the war wants either recruited or eliminated. Talk about a rough Tuesday. Season 1 wasn't shy about splitting itself into two very different flavors, and that's actually part of the story here. It kicked off with the Kyoto arc back in July of last year, easing viewers into the world, the powers, the politics of it all. Then in October, it shifted into the Nerima arc, which is widely considered the moment the show actually found its footing. And that's not just fan opinion, that's basically consensus at this point. If you tuned in for episode 1 and thought this is fine, but it's not blowing my mind, and then you bailed, you missed the turn where this show stopped being fine and started being genuinely dangerous. That's important context, because it tells you something crucial about how this franchise operates. It builds. It doesn't peak immediately and coast. It loads the gun quietly and then, arc by arc, starts pulling the trigger. Which brings us to the actual reason we're all here today, because at Anime Japan 2026, the Tougen Anki booth dropped a bomb. And that bomb is called the Nikko Kegon Falls arc. New key art. New cast. A confirmed October 2026 premiere. And if you know anything about this franchise's source material, you already know this isn't just the next arc. Multiple outlets and longtime readers have flagged this as the longest and arguably the most narratively significant arc in the entire manga so far. This is the arc where the show's DNA fully mutates into whatever twisted, morally gray creature it's ultimately meant to become. So buckle in, because we've got a lot of ground to cover, and it only gets darker from here. Before we go further down this rabbit hole, or should I say, demon hole, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell, because Anime's Update is where you're getting these breakdowns the moment the news drops, not 3 weeks late after everyone's already moved on. All right, bell's rung. Let's keep pulling this thread. So let's talk about the 2 new instructors who just got confirmed for the cast, because these reveals were, frankly, chef's kiss casting choices dressed up as horror movie red flags. First up, Hagure Nekasaki, voiced by Nobuhiko Okamoto, who joins Resetsu Academy as a part-time instructor. The official character description basically goes, he seems pretty polite, but, and then just trails off. That's it. That's the whole vibe. In anime language, he seems polite, but is basically a giant neon sign flashing, do not trust this man. And honestly, we wouldn't have it any other way. Then there's Yu Inami, voiced by Kent Ito, who's also joining as a part-time instructor at Resetsu Academy, except his defining trait is that he is constantly, and I mean constantly, coughing up blood, and yet remains relentlessly upbeat about it. Imagine your gym teacher having a persistent internal injury, and instead of going to the hospital, he's like, all right, everybody, drop and give me 20. That's Inami. That's the energy. Both of these guys were brought in specifically because series regular Nato Mudano requested extra instructors for a brand new training regimen the students are about to go through, which, if you know anything about anime training arcs, means the next chunk of episodes is going to be equal parts brutal and character-defining. And speaking of the returning cast, because let's not forget, this isn't a reboot, it's a continuation. Kazuki Yura is back as our lead, Shiki Ichinos. Hiroshi Kamiya returns as Nato Mudano, and Kotaro Nishiyama is back as Jin Kugasaki. Behind them is a genuinely deep bench. Monica Iwami as Hamar Biobagora, Shogo Sakata as Ikari Yoroshi, Natsuki Haney as Juji Yuzurub, Kaito Miura as Rokuro Kiriyama, Aimi as Kuina Sazanami, and Ryohei Kimura as Kyoya Oranzaka. That's not a small cast, that's a full roster. And every one of these names is walking into an arc that fans have been calling the moment the story sheds its training wheels for good. Now let's talk staff, because this is where the pedigree gets seriously interesting. Directing this next arc is Otto Nanaka, and if that name rings a bell, it should, because Nanaka previously worked as an episode director on Fate/Zero. If you know anything about Fate/Zero, you know that show is basically a masterclass in morally gray characters making increasingly terrible decisions for reasons that make horrifying sense. That is not a random hire. That is a studio looking at the Nikko Kegon Falls arc's reputation for moral complexity and going, yeah, we need the guy who's already proven he can direct chaos with nuance. Supporting Nanaka is assistant director Hiroyuki Hashimoto, with Yuki Sugawara continuing on series composition and scripts, Ryoko Amasaki back on character design, and composer Kota Yamamoto returning to score the whole thing. And that last one matters more than people give it credit, for Season 1's soundtrack was consistently singled out as one of the strongest elements of the entire show. So having Yamamoto back isn't just continuity. It's a guarantee the emotional gut punches are going to land exactly where they're supposed to. Production is being handled once again by Studio Hibari, and here's a fun little pit stop for context. This isn't some scrappy first-timer of a source. Tougen Anki, the manga, is written and illustrated by Yura Urushibara, currently serialized in Akita Shoten's Weekly Shonen Champion, and it's not some under-the-radar title either. We're talking over 5.5 million copies in circulation. That's not niche dark fantasy nobody's heard of numbers. This thing has a real, dedicated, growing fanbase numbers. For folks who want to read ahead, by the way, Yen Press publishes the English version under the title Tougen Anki, Legend of the Cursed Blood, so if you can't wait until October, the receipts are already out there. Alright, let's actually dig into what the Nikko Kegon Falls arc is about, because the premise alone should tell you why fans have been buzzing about this one specifically. The arc centers on Mudano pursuing a character named Yoroshi, who has teamed up with an independent faction of Oni called the Kikoku Unit, and their entire mission statement is chillingly simple. Wipe out every Momotaro. Not defeat. Not weaken. Wipe out. Leading that unit is a man named Hei Todoroki, who's carrying a deeply personal vendetta against Momotaro's bloodline. And as the story pushes deeper into the Nikko Kegon Falls facility, the conflict between his unit and Mudano's team only escalates. This is where the franchise's reputation for shifting alliances and psychological tension really starts to earn its stripes. Think of it like this: if Season 1 was the show teaching you the rules of the chessboard, the Nikko Kegon Falls arc is where it flips the board over and says, actually, some of these pieces were never on the side you thought they were. That's the level of rug pull we're talking about. And here's the analogy that I think really nails the tonal shift happening here. Picture your favorite sports team's preseason training camp. Everybody's grinding, bonding, figuring out their roles, maybe a few rivalries forming in a fun, competitive way. Now imagine halfway through that training camp, someone reveals that one of the assistant coaches has been secretly working for the opposing franchise this entire time, and also several of your teammates are about to get violently reassigned to the other team without their consent. That whiplash, that's the energy the Nikko Kegon Falls arc brings. It takes what feels like a structured, safe training arc setup with new instructors and turns it into the breeding ground for the show's darkest turn yet. Now, let's zoom out for a second, because I want to talk about why this particular announcement matters in the bigger anime landscape, not just for existing fans, but for anyone sitting on the fence. Tougen Anki Season 1, by most accounts, had a genuinely rocky start. It's been openly described as a show that divided opinions. Throughout its first run, some viewers bounced hard off those early Kyoto arc episodes, and honestly, that's a fair criticism. Slow burn world building isn't for everyone. But here's the thing that makes this announcement genuinely exciting instead of just, oh, another sequel got confirmed. The back half of Season 1, the Nerima arc, is widely regarded as a legitimate turnaround. This is a series that's actively getting better as it goes, which, in an industry absolutely flooded with shows that peak in episode 1 and coast on nostalgia for the rest of their run, is refreshingly rare. And if the Nikko Kegon Falls arc really is the strongest material in the source manga, which, again, is the consensus among people who've actually read ahead, then October might genuinely be the moment Tougen Anki stops being that dark fantasy show some people liked, and becomes the dark fantasy show everyone's suddenly talking about. But let's be real about the challenge here too, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is a guaranteed slam dunk. October 2026 is shaping up to be an absolute war zone of a season. Fall anime seasons are always stacked, but this one's looking particularly brutal, with major sequels and high-profile new releases all fighting for the same eyeballs and the same watchlist slots. And Tougen Anki, for all its manga sales and behind-the-scenes talent, doesn't have the instant name recognition of a Demon Slayer or a Jujutsu Kaisen. It's not walking in with a built-in audience the size of a small country. What it does have, though, is momentum real earned. We actually got better, momentum plus a director with Fate/0 on his resume, a returning composer whose work was already a highlight, and source material that readers keep saying is the franchise's peak. That's not nothing. That's actually a pretty compelling underdog case. Let's talk distribution too, because accessibility is a huge factor in whether momentum like this actually converts into viewership. And the good news here is that Tougen Anki isn't hiding behind some obscure regional streaming wall. The Nikko Kegon Falls arc is confirmed to launch globally outside Japan across a genuinely massive platform spread. We're talking Crunchyroll, Netflix worldwide except Japan and mainland China, Prime Video worldwide outside Japan, plus Samsung TV Plus, Aichi International, Bilibili's Station, ADN, and a handful of other regional services rounding it out. In Japan itself, it's slotted into Nippon TV's Friday anime night programming block, which, if you're tracking industry signals, is a pretty solid vote of confidence from the network. Basically, whatever your platform of choice is, there's a very good chance this show is going to be sitting right there waiting for you when October rolls around. No excuses. One more detail before we wrap this up, because it's a small thing, but it says a lot about how seriously the production is treating this next chapter. The trailer that dropped alongside this cast reveal wasn't just talking heads and text cards. It included an actual blast sequence, straight from Studio Hibari's animation pipeline, giving fans their first real taste of the combat intensity this arc is bringing to the table. And if you've watched any of Season 1's fight choreography, you know Studio Hibari isn't playing around when it comes to making conflict feel visceral. Pairing that kind of animation muscle with a story arc this narratively loaded is exactly the kind of combination that turns a pretty good show into a can't-miss event. So here's where that leaves us. Two new instructors who both radiate something's off here, energy walking straight into a training regimen. A director pulling from Fate/0 level moral complexity. A composer returning to make sure the emotional beats hit as hard as the physical ones. A manga arc that longtime readers consistently point to as the franchise's best material yet. And a global release plan wide enough that pretty much nobody's getting left out this time. Whether you watched Season 1 and bounced, watched it and got hooked by the Naruma arc turnaround, or you're coming in completely fresh off this trailer, the Nikko Kegon Falls arc is shaping up to be the moment Tougen Anki either quietly becomes must-watch television or loudly announces itself as one of the fall season's biggest sleeper hits. Either way, come October, that waterfall's got a body count waiting behind it, and I, for one, cannot wait to see who ends up on which side of it. That's everything on Tougen Anki's Nikko Kegon Falls arc reveal. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.